want to say hello to everybody. And sorry I missed everybody at SABR 50. Really wanted to be there, my wife and I. Unfortunately, we got bit by the COVID bug. So of all weeks to happen. But so we move on. And I want to share with you guys a bit of a Baltimore Orioles, a slice of history from the Baltimore Orioles / Marlins Florida State League A-level from 1966 to 81. They were affiliated with the Baltimore Orioles. Some of you may have attended spring training games or Florida State League games during this time period. I know that probably the spring training games were much more well attended than the regular season Florida State League games. But I'll just jump right into it. Next slide, go. Just to give you a little background, this is Miami Stadium. Of course, some of you may have been there when the, well, like I was saying earlier, spring training. Some of you may have attended the Florida State League games. Just a little background information on Miami Stadium. It opened in August of 1949 for the Miami Sun Sox, which was a Brooklyn Dodgers organization affiliate at the time, in the Florida, that was the Florida International League. The Orioles came into play in 1959 and 60 when they were the AAA, had the AAA affiliation with the Miami Marlins then. And unfortunately, that was ill-fated. The team only lasted with the Orioles for 2 years. 3 years prior to that, they were affiliated of the Philadelphia Phillies. And basically, baseball went silent in 1961 and moved up to A when the minor leagues reorganized, and the Orioles came in 66. Through those years, 16 seasons all that the Orioles had with the Florida State League, we had 3 Hall of Famers come through this town and several major leaguers, and we'll touch on some of those names, and I'm sure you'll remember the 3 Hall of Famers as we go along. Go to the next slide. The first season was 1966. The owner of the team at the time was a gentleman by the name of Bill Miranda, a businessman who was very sold on baseball and having it in the city of Miami. They had a moderate success initially, but he was very dissatisfied with the Phillies. And in the 4 seasons that the Phillies had the Marlins at the time, they only had 1 winning season. And so he sought out somebody who could supply them with a better line of talent, and he found that with the Baltimore Orioles. So the initial season was in 1966. I have a picture of the team here, the roster. Billy DeMars was the manager in 1966, and probably the most memorable thing about that season, other than they had a winning season, which was very thrilling to the fans at the time, was the longest 29-inning game in minor league history, the longest continuous game. I know that the Rochester game against Pawtucket is the longest game, but it was played over 2 different days. But this was the longest, and as far as I know, still the longest continuous game. It lasted 6 hours and 59 minutes, went from 7 in the evening until the next day, until 1 something in the morning. There's a lot of subplots to this game, a lot of interesting stories. It was almost the participants that I spoke to in this game. It just was there was catches and weird plays and all kinds of unusual circumstances that stretched this game out. But basically that first season was a success. The Marlins drew very good attendance, had a spike in attendance, and so probably the biggest star in that team was a gentleman by Frank Tepedino. You might remember him more as a Yankee than anything. We'll go to the next slide. In 1967, we took a little bit of a step backwards. Cal Ripken Sr. was the manager, and you can see him here with his family. You can probably identify Cal as a young Cal Ripken there, Jr. on the far left, and Billy by his mom there. no fault of Cal's, but during that season, they had an outbreak of injuries. Quite a few of the players were called into the military service. They lost their best hitter, Paul Flesner, and an excellent Ken. They really didn't even have a full roster again and catch, but Orioles management, upward management wouldn't allow it. And so this was the one season, one of the few seasons under the Orioles that they did have a losing season. What was interesting is that the Ripken boys were very active with the team. And a lot of the players remembered them running around the field. They played soccer and the connection they had with their dad. And they said even at a young age, they could see that Cal Ripken Jr., just the way he held himself, he played ball as a young boy. They could see it in the future that he would definitely go on to the major leagues. So we'll go on to the next slide. One of the first Hall of Famers to appear in a Marlins, they were still called the Marlins then, and you'll see him in the top left. Recognize Jim Palmer. That's Miami Stadium in the background with one of a unique kind cantilever roof. Beautiful stadium, state of the art. Jim was on rehab in '67 and '68. The Marlins and later the Orioles had a good connection with the Orioles, and they were able to sign veteran players even at the A level. Though Jim was there for rehab, at certain points, they actually had, for instance, Pancho Herrera came in the '68-'69 season. He would join the team late in the season after finishing the Mexican League, and basically would help them down the stretch to win the pennant in both of those seasons, '68-'69, and '69 they won the championship. There also was a cast of characters, as you might guess. One person I wanted to point out in particular was Greg Arnold, who had some modicum of fame. Greg played ball with Ronnie Shelton, and if you may know Ronnie Shelton's name, he was the creator of Bull Durham, the movie, and he played on a couple of teams with Ronnie. And basically, Greg's claim to fame, as he says, the character of Nuke LaLoosh was based on him. And doing the research, when I wrote my baseball book, the second volume, Baseball Under the Palms 2, some of that is true. As far as how they, as an example, would douse the field with water so they didn't have to play a game. Greg was a unique personality. When he pitched on the mound, his hair always had to be a certain way. He had a funny story in the Miami papers. They asked him in the season, what did he do for a workout? How did he keep in shape? And he said he tossed coconuts in Opalaka. You'll see on the bottom left is a group of players. That's from 1968, the color picture. Mixed in with that group is a gentleman by the name of Tom Walker, who later went on to play for the Expos, Tigers, Angels, and Cardinals, I think, altogether. But there was a very close-knit group. That picture was supplied by a gentleman by the name of Dick Ryan. He was also a pitcher and a teammate of Tom Walker's at the time. And of course, you might know that Tom Walker's son, Neil, also played in the big leagues, and I remember mostly playing for the Pirates. Some of the cast of characters also, Johnny Oates, he was one of those guys that kept the team loose. There was also a collection of other guys, George Geomans, John Herson, who were both from Maryland, came out of the University of Maryland, also had a reputation of being quite the characters. So let's go to the next slide. In 1969, this is where the Marlins, and they're soon to change their name to the Miami Orioles, come to fruition. Now, the gentleman who is the third from the right is a gentleman by the name of Woody Smith. He originally played with the original Miami Marlins AAA affiliate, which was from 1956 to 60. As I stated earlier, the first 3 years they were a Phillies affiliate, and then the last 2 years an Orioles affiliate. But Woody was an icon in Miami. And when the '69 season rolled around, they needed a new manager. Orioles management was very pro keeping people within their organization. They wanted to hire their own manager. But a gentleman by the name of Bill Durney Jr., who was the son of Bill Durney, who was famous in his own right in Miami as a broadcaster and managing them, working in the front office for the Marlins, was pretty persistent. He wanted Woody to come in. Woody had never managed before, but he was very popular in Miami. And I think, and also recognizing his baseball knowledge and his leadership ability, he basically went to war for Woody and he got him a job. And Woody managed a team. He had the longest reign as manager of a Miami Marlins or Orioles team for 4 years. In those 4 years, not only did he win his division 4 times, he won the FSL championship 4 straight years. Unprecedented. Nobody in the Florida State League has done that in the past or in the future and in recently. So it's quite an accomplishment. The story with Woody is kind of a sad story, though. After the 72 season, a gentleman by the name of Don Priest, and some of you who are familiar with the Orioles may have remembered that name from a while ago. Don called him in, flew to St. Louis where Woody lived, and wanted to talk to him. And so Woody thought, and his goal was to get a job either up in the system or to be a coach on the major league level. So he thought, well, this is going to be my break. And unfortunately what happened is Don said, Woody, we don't have any place for you to go. We have all of our people in place. We think it's better that, maybe you try to find work somewhere else. And it was really a shock to Woody. And it's one of those sad stories. Woody did move on and manage later. In fact, the next season he did manage at Key West, the Key West Conchs in the same league. But I think it was talking to the family, it really affected Woody the rest of his life. It really hurt him. And although he wouldn't have admitted it outwardly, I think he was very disappointed with the Orioles. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Cool. I'm going to talk a little bit about those years and some of the players that they had and some of the experiences. You'll notice in the top left corner, that's Don Baylor sliding into third base. He was with the Marlins early in the '69 season. Very talented. Of course, he didn't stay in Miami long. They moved him up to AA. On the bottom left, the 3 pitchers there. On the left is John Montague. There's John Hofford in the middle and Mike Herson on the right, more popularly known as the Hearst, very popular. Montague, of course, played in the big leagues, and Herson was one of those characters that kind of fit in the same mold with Greg Arnold and George Manns. At the end of a game that he would start, he would raise his head up in the air and sniff, and the players would go, Herson sniffs a victory, and he'd get the last out, and so he was famous for kind of rubbing in on the opponents. And the top right is Jim Fuller. In 1971, Jim set or tied the Florida State League for home runs in a season. Now I'm going to tell you, it was only 33 home runs, which doesn't sound a lot when you compare it to other leagues, but you have to keep in mind that the Florida State League, many years, the home run leaders for the league would come in at about 12 to 15 home runs. So when Jim did this, it was monumental. He basically tied a record in 1971, a 21-year-old record that was held by a gentleman by the name of Levy, who played for, I believe it was St. Augustine in 1950, who also hit 30 home runs. But Jim was known for his monster blasts. And in Miami Stadium in particular, is really a pitcher's park. And so to hit that many home runs in a season in the Florida State League at the time was unheard of. It generated a lot of excitement in the league. Players would actually from the opposing teams come out and watch Jim take batting practice and launch 400, 500-foot home runs. It was nothing for him. As I was saying earlier, the Marlins tended to sign players to help them down the pennant drive. And if you'll notice on the bottom right, that's Orlando Pena sitting at Miami Stadium. They brought him in during the 71 and 72 seasons. And basically he had 2 seasons of sub-1 ERAs. And I think over the 2 seasons, his record was 25-8 over the 2 years. Um, he kind of fit in that same old Pancho Herrera came in late in 68, 69. So it wasn't unusual, and the Orioles were very supportive of the Marlins as far as making sure that they succeeded on the field. All right, we'll go to the next slide. Basically, from 1968 till 78, the Marlins basically, and the Orioles, which they became in 1971, dominated the Florida State League. The one exception of the year, even though they did have a winning record, was 1974. And here you see Eddie Murray, future Hall of Famer, a picture in the Miami paper, was a member of that team. Believe it or not, that team didn't make the playoffs, and they had pitcher Dennis Martinez, Mike Flanagan, and of course, Eddie Murray was on that team. It seems strange, but as we go over this, the 3 seasons that the Marlins had a Hall of Famer team, even if it was like Jim Palmer briefly, they did not win the league championship. Excuse me, with the exception of 68, they lost in the championship series, but the league awarded them the league championship because of the best record that they had. An interesting story about 1974 is a young man by the name of Jeff Fermisco played on that team and had numbers very similar to Eddie. Excuse me. But he was affected by, he had allergies. And if you believe in this or not, he was allergic to grass and the dirt. So his baseball career, unfortunately, was cut short. And although a disappointment to him, he did go on later in life and become a teacher, and he overcame his allergies later in life. All right, our next slide. The last championship team of the Miami experience was in 1978. As you can see, the Miami Orioles, this is pictured at Miami Stadium. This team essentially won 2 championships, because not only did they win the Florida State League in 78, most of these players were on the 1980 Charlotte O's that also won the Southern League Championship. In fact, I looked up the records, and 6 of the 9 starters that were on the 78 Miami team were also starters on the Charlotte O's. On the far right in the Hawaiian shirt, you'll notice a gentleman by the name of Sonny Hirsch. If you're a U of M football fan, you'll know that name very well. He's legendary for calling the U of M football games as well as U of M baseball. And he also did Miami Orioles and Miami Marlins games in his past, going clear back to 1956 with the original Miami Marlins. At this point, he was working in the front office for the Orioles. We'll go to the next slide. I just wanted to show the following year, 79. We'll go to the next slide. This is the 79 Orioles, and you'll see a familiar face. Let me see if I can find him. He's in the second row next to the last on the far right. That's Cal Ripken Jr. And unfortunately, this was one of the few Orioles teams that didn't make the playoffs in the Florida State League. At this point, things had begun to go a little bit downhill, especially Miami Stadium, but also the talent they were receiving, very unsafe. As you might know, this was in the background at the time. There was a lot of riots in the Miami. Miami kind of had this reputation. It was the murder capital of the United States. The area known as Alapata had become to deteriorate, had kind of started to go down. And almost in step, the team kind of started to go the same route. We'll go to the next slide. In 1980, this is when probably was the death knell of the Miami Orioles as far as in the Florida State League. On an evening, I believe it was in August, two gentlemen, Charles Matanis, excuse me, and Angel Garcia were attending a game at Miami Stadium. Outside the stadium, a gentleman by the name of Jose Tomas was jealous about another male, something to do with a girlfriend or wife, brought a gun to the park, and he shot another gentleman in the neck. In order to help this gentleman, being good Samaritans they were, Charles and Angel tried to help. They ran after the gentleman who did the shooting. He shot back and shot and killed both of these two. They tried to save their lives. Police came on the scene, but they could not, unfortunately, save them. This was big news in Miami at the time. With the death of the two men, believe it or not, they finished playing the game. They did not call or suspend the game. They did finish the game that night. And from that point on, as the Miami paper stated, it became a place that you didn't want to go to. By then, whatever little positive reputation Miami Stadium probably had was pretty much negated. And the Orioles at this point were pretty much ready to move on. They did go through the 81 season and fill out the 81 season, but then they broke off their affiliation with the Orioles at the time. All right, we'll go to the last slide here. And Miami Stadium stood until 2001. Baseball continued in Miami Stadium up till 89. There was a short run with the San Diego Padres, I believe it was 82, 83. Most of those last few years, they were independent. The team in 89 played in Hialeah briefly before moving to Pompano Beach. They still maintain the name, the Miami, well, I should say they were Miami Miracle by then. They changed their name from the Orioles, or from the Marlins to the Miracle. Their club was ran by Mike Veck, Bill Veck's son, and they had some very creative, as you might guess, creative game promotions. Their last manager, by the way, was an Oriole coach, Freddie Gonzalez. He broke in with Miami and he's from Miami. And all that remains now of Miami Stadium, it was torn down in 2001, is this marker that a gentleman by the name of Abel Sanchez raised money for and was able to put up the marker so that people could see where the stadium once stood. The Miami Stadium apartments are there. So he felt that by putting up the marker, the people would understand that the stadium and was once there, and he gave a real nice history. If you ever get a chance to come to Miami, it's on Northwest 10th Avenue and 23rd Street on the corner. So you can't miss it. It's the entryway into the Miami Stadium apartments. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of history on the slice of history on the Miami Orioles and their affiliation with the team. If you want to learn more, before I answer questions, I do have a book available. It's Baseball Under the Palms, Volume 2. Some of you may have seen it at the at the SABR 50 convention. And it has a lot of great stories and interviews. I interviewed over 100 players and team personnel and a few fans, and they're included in the book. And I have to tell you, the funnest part of writing the book was speaking to these people. And some of the best stories came from the players that weren't necessarily famous and maybe only got up to AA at the highest, or maybe they finished in the A ball, like Jeff Ferramisco. So I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Anybody have any questions? Please feel free.
I was wondering, in regard to the location of Miami Stadium, was it close to where the Florida Marlins Stadium is now?
Yeah, it's not very far away. I would guess, just guessing, maybe a mile, maybe a little more. It's not that far.
And that would have been near where the old Orange Bowl would have been. Is that correct? the Orange Bowl football stadium.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you mean Miami it butted up against the Orange Bowl Park.
You did.
It
Okay.
butted up. Yeah.
Hey, hi, Sam.
Hi.
Great stuff. This is John Moyer. I just was going to ask you, did you come across them doing anything special to try to accommodate the weather down there? I know when they had baseball in Houston before the Astrodome, they would start games at, first thing in the morning or play really late at night. I did see that this more of the stands were covered, so that would probably made it more comfortable. But did they do anything else to enable baseball in that weather?
Not really, because in Miami, as you might know, especially when you get into the hurricane season, it typically rains in the afternoon towards the evening. Miami Stadium was actually very equipped to handle, you'd have torrential downpours, but the way they had designed the field and the draining system, they were able to accommodate most games. In fact, sometimes there was an interesting story with the original Miami Marlins. They would actually fly in a helicopter over the infield, and the rotating blades would help to dry out the infield during some games. So that was interesting. The cantilever roof helped because mostly a lot of fans could get under the roof and they weren't exposed to the rain and the sun. That was definitely a plus. So even on a rainy day, there was usually plenty of seats available. You could slip up in there until the rain passed and the game went on. So that wasn't unusual. But you would think in Miami with an open air stadium, more games were rained out, but there wasn't as many games rained out as you would think.
Thank you.
I've got one other question, and that is, what became of Jim Fuller? I'm not sure. You mentioned how he hit these mammoth home runs in 1971. How did his career progress, or did it?
Well, he had some brief time up with the Orioles and the Astros. He only hit 11 home runs in the major leagues. He was never a regular. He was prone not to be able to hit the curveball. That's what happened with Jim. Jim, when he broke the record, like I said, he tied the record, and wherever he went, they would usually draw bigger crowds. People in the Florida State League weren't used to seeing home run hitters. He had a short run in the major leagues. He was a bit of a health nut. When he was with Miami, he drank or he would drink tea every day, healthy tea. He had a diet of food that he would eat. His mother was really into nutritional foods, and he was also a religious guy. So he was, he didn't get in any kind of trouble, didn't drink or smoke or anything like that. After his major league career, he kind of made a mark for himself playing softball, fast pitch softball, and he even had a bat. I think it was Worth Company named a bat after him. He hit so many home runs, and he became somewhat famous for that also. I'm not sure what he did after as far as a career. I really wanted to interview Jim, but I never got the opportunity. Was one of the few players I couldn't get a hold of, and I would have loved to have talked to him. Supposedly his teammates said he was just a wonderful teammate to play for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sam, I got a question to ask you.
Yeah.
Sam, I'm Donald Wiederecht. I've read your book, and your book is a really, really good book.
Yeah, I know.
Yes.
Yeah, we haven't had a conversation.
But your book is really good in the respect that you don't have to necessarily have to know a lot. You read the book, you hear what the players said at that each of those eras, and you say to yourself, boy, Miami had a great experience with minor league baseball, even with the struggles that they had. I was there in 1980. I worked for the team in 1980, and we had John Stefero and Mike Young and Storm Davis. We had a few guys that went as high as AAA, and Lance Nichols was the manager, and he was with the Oriole organization for a long time. And it was really an amazing experience to go to a game there. It was kind of like Ebbets Field, because Miami was a lot like that stadium was kind of like a community stadium. It wasn't a major league stadium, but it was kind of a community stadium. And if you went to a game there, you sat in different parts of the stadium. You know, you see a lot of different types of people there, and that was the amazing part about going to a game. You know, one day it's a few hundred, next day it's a few thousand, and you know, Sonny Hirsch did a really good job of promoting the team. And you're right, Sonny had a lot of influence as far as the period of time that Miami had minor league baseball in town. And that is interesting that you put that in the book, because I think there are only a few people like Joe Ryan and Sonny Hirsch that kept the team going for many, many years, when a lot of people probably would have said, we don't want to have a team because we don't draw a large crowd. But they kept the team there for civic reasons. They wanted Miami to have the Orioles, and they also wanted to keep spring training there. And I think that was very important at that time. Your book is incredible. Like you said, there's over 100 people in it. And when I read the stories, some of the things that you posted just a few minutes ago, those were pictures that were in the office at Miami Stadium. When you walked in the office, it was like walking into a baseball museum, because they had all their team pictures and all the managers' pictures. And I never knew before I worked for the Orioles that Cal Ripken Sr. was the manager at any point. I had heard of Cal Ripken Jr. because he was a prospect at that time. And like I said, you have a treasure in there, because people know about Miami, but they don't know the history of Miami minor league baseball. And this is it. And your first book was very good too, on Miami baseball, and the Marlins book was very good. But this one, to me, touches me because of the fact that when I got there in '79, I started following this team from the time that I got there until the time they moved to Fort Myers in '91, at the end of the '91 season. They had to move because there was Major League Baseball coming. And that was and you know, Miami probably could have kept, the Miami area probably could have kept the team had there never been a Major League team coming in, but it was not possible to have a Class A team when you had a Major League team that was moving in to the thing. So the history is just incredible. 62 to 91, that's a lot of time, 30 years, and you covered a lot of ground in that. And believe me, you got a lot of information, not only from the players, but from the periodicals, the Miami News, the Miami Herald, some of the other papers that covered Florida State League Baseball. And Florida State League Baseball is kind of not the most important thing in most people's minds as far as minor league baseball goes, but it actually is a developmental league. And a lot of guys developed in Miami that became good players. And I really enjoyed the book. I can't tell you, it's a real great book to read. And certainly it's a treasure for me. And I certainly remember my experience in 1980, but that book covers a lot of more ground than I could possibly have had known when I was working there.
Oh, I appreciate that. You know, there's so many great stories, and I didn't have time to share all of them. You know, you mentioned Cal Ripken Jr. When he was with the team, 79, one of the concerns, believe it or not, with Cal is he hit for average, but he didn't hit for power, and the Orioles were concerned that he wasn't going to hit enough home runs to make himself, you know, a bona fide major leaguer. And he didn't hit that season he was there, did not hit a home run until July, believe it or not. You know, and you take into account, yes, Miami is a hard park to hit a home run out of. The league is just plain hard. It's basically a pitcher's league at the time, and you probably remember it's a pitcher's league. But and then look what happened with Cal. Even Eddie Murray, I think he might have hit in the low double figures in home runs, and they said that when he would take batting practice, he just hit bombs all day. But you know, you had the humidity to deal with, the wind, You had good pitching. The Orioles tended to put their best prospect pitchers there. You had like Herb Hudson. One year, Michael Aber, he won 21 games as a member of the 1970 Miami Marlins. You had guys like Dennis Martinez, Mike Flanagan came out of there, Alan Ramirez. There was a lot of great players and pitchers, like you said. And, you know, there's so many great stories that the guys shared. I wish I had the time to share more of them. I had to kind of do it fast paced so that I get in the time. But oh, I really appreciate the words you said. And, you know, I want to also bring out the point that when I wrote the book, I did it with my wife, so we did it together. And I thought that was really special. She had a connection to Miami Stadium like yourself. She grew up around Miami Stadium. And her father used to have the Cubanitos, which was a league for kids, the Cuban kids. And they would play their games in the summer. And I think I even mentioned once in the book, when they would hold the tournaments, they would actually fill Miami Stadium. So, you know, I really, I know a lot of people question that Miami isn't a baseball town, but I think at some level it is. I think it's a stronger baseball town than people think it is.
The thing about it is, if you have been to Miami Stadium, and I missed the place, you know, I really wish it was still up, but the place was painted in orange and black. So you knew it was an Orioles baseball park, and they made sure that you knew that when you walked in. And, you know, it was Oriole City in that era, and that when the Orioles had their team, and it was cool. I mean, the Yankees were 20 miles away in Fort Lauderdale, and the Miami Orioles were there, and then West Palm at the Expos. They had some great rivalries between those three teams.
Oh, the Yankees and the Orioles were even back to when they were the Marlins. They had great games, and it reflects some of that in the book. I remember the Yankee. I don't think people really realize how deep a talent Miami had, especially during the Woody Smith years, 69 to 72. A pitcher by the name of Lenny Scott was a relief pitcher, would make a start every once in a while. And he had ERAs below 2 for 2 seasons. He was the premier closer in the Florida State League, but the Orioles were so deep in pitching, he couldn't move up. And that was a lot of players said that. The Yankee manager at the time, his last name was, I think, Mike Ferraro or Ferreira. You probably remember. He complained. He said, "Why are these guys in Miami playing? They should be at the double and triple A level." But you have to remember, the Orioles at that time were so stacked in talent that guys just would get bogged down in their system and they couldn't move up. So Miamians really got to enjoy. I mean, basically, they were seeing a double A team play, at least.
Can I just make one more comment? One of the great thrills that I had when I worked for the Orioles is I participated in a bilingual broadcast. We had bilingual broadcasts where it was in Spanish and English on the same station. And I worked on the game with another guy named Rick Potluck. And then we had the gentleman who translated into Spanish, and it was pretty cool. Now the game, unfortunately, is one of those rainy nights, so we didn't get much game activity going on, but we had Bob Feller in the conversation for about 45 minutes. And he said, Sonny would do anything to promote this team, and be able to have a bilingual broadcast on an FM radio station just to make sure he could get it on. He made sure that Rick Potluck could get that time and make sure that people would be aware of it. And actually, they wrote about it in the newspaper, in the Miami News. And even when I told people back home, it made it in the newspaper back in New York.
Mm-hmm. And that was a first, wasn't it, Don? The first broadcast like that of its time?
Yes, you had 3 announcers, 2 speaking English and 1 speaking Spanish. It was amazing. It was an amazing night, and Sonny.
I know, and you got some national play.
Yeah, Sonny made sure that we were able to do that. He wanted to have a first. He didn't want to have someone say they could do this. He knew he could do it.
Yeah, he was quite a personality, and everybody always speaks very highly of him. And there's a lot of people, I don't think in Miami, you know, a lot of people had such a part to play in baseball in Miami. You had, like you mentioned, Joe Ryan, Bill Durney Jr., Sonny Hirsch, so many people like that, that, you know, it's a shame. I would like to see the Marlins, the Miami Marlins, take a little more time and reflect on their history a little bit better.
Yeah, I think some people think that, you know, the minor league uh, experience in Miami is sort of not to be a memorable one, but it was definitely a memorable one when you consider they had a crowd of 56,000 back in the late 50s for a game at the Orange Bowl. And the fact that they and there were, believe me, there were times with the Orioles that, you know, we gave away Orioles memorabilia at the gate. We had batting helmets, we had all sorts of Orioles stuff, and believe me, they promoted the Orioles just as much as they promoted the local minor league team.
Bill Durney even had Jr. even had Hawaiian night where they would serve potato salad and barbecue.
Yeah, no, he was Bill Durney Jr. was the son of Bill Durney, the man who was actually worked for Bill Veeck in St. Louis and was one of the people that was in charge of Eddie Goodell.
Yeah, they had a history going back to the St. Louis Browns, which Browns became the Orioles. So interesting how history treats different people and how we're all connected in some way.
Well, you know, last thing I want to say is, people, you should buy the book because the Oriole history and of the guys who play in the minor leagues is just as interesting as some of the guys who play in the major leagues. And you can't find anything like this book anywhere else. So I would recommend Sam's book, hands down.
Well, thank you, Don. I appreciate it.
I have a
Karen, did you have a
question.
question?
Yes, I have a question. Out of all the people that you've interviewed, what was your best one?
Oh, boy. I have to tell you, the ones that I remember the most, I really enjoyed interviewing a gentleman by the name of John Herson. They called him the Hearse. Told a little story about him earlier. He was a character, very popular. Oh, boy. And I had the opportunity when I wrote this book, though he wasn't an Oriole, I interviewed Ferguson Jenkins when he came up in Miami in 62 and 63 as a Phillies prospect. And some of the insights he gave, he lived, if you're from Miami and you know a little about the history, he stayed at the Sir John Hotel, which was part of the Sir John nightclub, where all the famous performers came to Miami for him. And so in those days, unfortunately, the black players stayed separate from the white players. But the interesting thing is when I interviewed, for example, John Muschin, he was a star early on. He said that on the field, that the players and in the clubhouse, and even later years, that never was an issue with the players. Even during the riots in Miami during the late 70s and 80s, the players, there wasn't any division in the clubhouse, so to speak. The players hung out together. There wasn't any, you know, any friction between anybody or feelings. I noticed that especially in the 68 team, that picture you saw on the bottom left that was color with Tom Walker, George Mans, and I called him Pumpsy Green was another player. They gave him that nickname after the famous old Met. It was just kind of a theme that ran throughout the organization. And I thought that was really special. But I remember those two. I'm trying to think who else. There were so many. I interviewed Paul Gilliford. I wish I would have mentioned him in my presentation. He was part of the 66 team. And that game that went 29 innings, his minor league career actually turned around in that game. He pitched 11 games in relief of that game, didn't get a decision, but he changed Billy DeMar's mind. After that game, Billy inserted him into the starting rotation, and he ended up finishing that season 16-3, threw a no-hitter, and he had numerous shutouts, and eventually was inducted into the Florida State League Hall of Fame. That was one of the great seasons ever by a Miami minor league Florida State League team.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. Great question.
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Pretty good. Sorry I didn't get to do this, Sam, obviously at Saber 50. For those of you who didn't come, I think the official number is around 540 attendees. From a local chapter standpoint, of course, we would have liked 800 or 900, but in a post-COVID world, we're not going to complain. And it seemed, I know Francis was there. I don't know about anybody else, but it seemed the feedback we got was pretty good for a city that's never hosted it. And the Orioles will finish 500, hopefully. What do we have? 10 games left? 9. So, you know, they won't make the postseason, but building for the future, and they're probably further along than anybody, including fans, expected. From the Miami thing, I heard Mattingly's not coming back, for those who are fans down there. So no surprise there, probably. And
Is that by his choice or?
mutual.
Yeah.
So that was announced today, and Tony La Russa is not coming back for health reasons. So, but other than that, I don't know any other major news. I know
Well, one thing else, if I could interject one thing about tonight's presentation, Sam, I would have liked to have heard you at the convention, but it's nice to have you have about twice as much time as you would have had at the convention.
Oh, thank
because
you.
you could elaborate on it more. And also you might be interested. In fact, I went to the convention, but I came home with COVID.
Well, I was so disappointed
Actually
in my
didn't
wife
hit
that
me.
I couldn't go. It was, you know, we had planned so much for it and put so much together, and
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, it didn't hit me till I got back home, but I must have picked it up somewhere there. But anyway, I had a relatively mild case.
oh, thank
But,
God for that. Good.
But it was nice to have more time to absorb the information that you provided tonight than you would have been able to do at the convention.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you know, there's so many, I sit down and when I look at my slides and everything, there's so many stories I can tell, and I feel so bad because I missed some of the names, like Paul at the end. He had such a great season, and Michael Aber. And there's so many guys like that had great seasons, and then you just can't get everybody, you know, you have just so much time. But, you know, if you do get a chance to read the book, there's a ton more stories, and there were some stories I couldn't put in the book by request of the players, but but I think I pretty much caught the spirit of the team and everything. So yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
I think if you had done your presentation here, I believe you were the first one in the morning. So I forget which
Yeah.
day. So, you know, sometimes you would have, you know, depending, you could have got a full crowd, or you could have got the lazy dogs who didn't want to slug their way down from their room just yet. So, so we appreciate, we're glad you have the opportunity to tell at least a little bit and, you know, share. And then, you know, our buddy Jacob will have this up on the SABR and YouTube page, you know, in a couple days.
Oh,
So,
super. Well, I appreciate you having me, Peter. Really grateful for that. Thank you so much.
absolutely. So I'm glad, you know, you're feeling better. I'm glad everybody looks fairly healthy with my limited vision here. But you know, we're already almost October. So, you know, one down to the year and the one down to the season, and then all of a sudden it's going to be the holidays, and then January and Saber Day, and we all start again. So we do know, obviously next year the convention's back in Chicago for those who are considering going. It's going to be at the same place it was for Saber 45 at the Palmer House Hilton. But I don't know if it's going to be geared more towards Cubs or White Sox or a little bit of both. I know from feedback from what Scott Bush and Scott Carter have told me last several years, people like to be able to walk to the ballpark from the convention hotel. And Chicago, obviously, that's not going to be the case. You're going to be Ubering or taking public transportation to either game. So,
Yeah, the other night I was in the New Jersey chapter, the Elysian Fields chapter meeting via Zoom, and I haven't looked at the schedule for next year, but Scott Bush was one of the guest speakers, and he said that it was going to be a White Sox game.
yeah. So, you know, and then of course, for those of us who stay longer, you might be able to get to the Cubs game. You know, Milwaukee's not that far away. So, you know, or you know, whatever's in your wheelhouse and what you have time for and what you can afford. So, I look forward to going back. I haven't been since the last convention. I did miss your 2016 convention in Florida because I was going through cancer and dialysis that year. So I had a legit excuse. But yeah, so we appreciate, I know, Sam, you've been working a lot, so please take it easy. You know, and our next meeting will be the first Wednesday of October, which I think is the 5th, which is also I think that's the last game of the regular season. So we're going to have the guy who's the president of the Elysian Fields chapter do a presentation. Why am I blanking on his name right now? But
So, David Krell.
Krell, yeah, who has another book coming out next year because I got an advance copy of it to read and review. So good guy. He'll have a nice presentation. We do have one lined up for November and obviously for December as well, for the first weekend of the month. And hopefully we'll continue to do this next year with the Zoom, you know, definitely one Zoom call, one in-person meeting, and one hybrid. So seems to go well. And I believe, I haven't gotten this officially from SABR headquarters, Baltimore is now the largest chapter. We're bigger than DC and we're bigger than
Wow.
Manhattan. So in terms of members on our roster, and of course those numbers are skewed because you're your primary chapter and then you can sit on every other roster too. So you're counted on everyone you sit on, but we have 560 plus now.
Wow.
Sitting on the Baltimore roster. And a lot of that was, you know, convention was going to be here and people joined up and whatnot. But we're for a 7-year-old chapter, I'm pretty proud that we're number one. And a lot of that obviously has to go with Bruce Brown, who's, you know, was the guru for all these years. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to go heat up some leftovers. The Orioles go on the road tomorrow to Boston. So I start a new job later this week, so I've been gearing up for that. And if you guys have any questions, email, Facebook message, whatever. And if not before, I'll see you then October 5th for our Peabody Heights meeting.
Good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sam.
Buddy, thank you.
Have a good week, guys.
You too. Take care.